Well, returning to Westminster now, Policing Minister Chris Philp made a rather embarrassing blunder on BBC's Question Time last night.
When asked by an audience member whether someone from the Democratic Republic of Congo would be sent to Rwanda under the scheme, the Tory MP had to clarify whether the DRC was a different country. If you missed it, here's what happened.
No, I think there's an exclusion on people from Rwanda being sent to Rwanda.
They're not from Rwanda, they're from Congo.
They're from Congo.
And they're supposedly
okay.
warring these people from Rwanda. Are they then going to be sent to Rwanda if they came here on a crossing?
From
Congo? Yeah.
Would people be sent from... Well, I mean, Rwanda is a different country of Congo, isn't it? It's a different country.
Yes.
It is.
Yes. Definitely. Are you saying if they come from a war zone in Congo, would they then be sent to Rwanda?
The best bit of that is Wes Streeting's face.
Well, apparently it's turned into a GIF already, so we shall see how that goes. Former Labour Party official Richard Power Said and political commentator Reem Ibrahim join us this morning to get stuck into these stories. Richard, you could see Chris Philp there. He was absolutely desperate, trying to make sense of this. Where's Rwanda? Where's the Democratic Republic of Congo? And, of course, Wes Streeting's picture was an absolute... his face was an absolute picture.
It was, wasn't it? I think we're going to carry on using that GIF of Wes for a long time to come. You know what, like, not having a kind of foundational knowledge of West African and Central African geography is not necessarily a problem, but Central African, I should say, but for a Tory minister who's talking about the Rwanda policy, it is a problem. And, you know, I used to work very closely with a team in DRC and a team in Rwanda for my previous job. And, you know, quite frankly, like, vibes between those two countries are really, really terrible. Rwandan soldiers have massacred civilians in the DRC, plundered property there, and an asylum seeker from the DRC who wanted to come to live in the UK, because there are lots of DRC people who, say, speak English, have got family here, and therefore be a sensible place for them to want to settle. If they were taken to Rwanda to have their asylum case processed, they would be in a lot of danger. And what this just reveals is the whole Rwanda policy of Rishi Sunak is fundamentally flawed, right? Because if you're saying that you're going to take somewhere safe to someone somewhere safe in order to process their asylum case, but you're taking them to a place where people get tortured in prison, then you're not taking them somewhere safe.
Well, there are many countries across the world in which people are tortured for multiple different reasons, and I wouldn't necessarily say that they're not safe. I think what's interesting about this particular issue is that I mean, obviously Wes Streeting's face is absolutely priceless, and I'm sure we'll be using that GIF
I think Wes
times.
Streeting will be making the most of that.
He will be himself. But I mean, I often feel like that every time politicians open their mouths too. But I think what's interesting about this is actually, I mean, I think you're right about the Rwanda policy, and I do think it is fundamentally flawed, primarily because it's going to cost so much and actually do so little. And we haven't seen anybody go onto those flights yet. But ultimately, it's a political narrative. And it's about Rishi Sunak being able to go into the election this year and say, we've had asylum seekers.
But what about the front page of the Telegraph this morning? The threat of being deported to Rwanda is causing an influx of migrants from the UK into Ireland. So you might argue that actually it's already working, that migrants are worried about being deported to Rwanda and they're moving away from the UK. Now, if that is the case, the government will be very pleased.
I agree, but I also think what this is interesting is actually it's not about necessarily the migrants themselves making those decisions, but it will be those criminal gangs that are actually sending them over there. And of course, there is no reason to believe that those migrants are going to stay in Ireland. There is every reason to believe that they will then potentially try and move over to the UK if they do as well. And I think what's interesting about this
is Nigerians who are already in the UK, isn't it? The Rwanda bill doesn't apply to Northern Ireland because the protocol takes precedence. Yes. So you can cross the border into Ireland. And Michal Martin, the Foreign Minister, saying, we're really concerned about this isn't working. But as you say, it might be a headline that the Tories can say, well, look, it's a deterrent.
Exactly, it's a headline. The entire thing, and actually I think Reem was kind of, going towards this point. The whole thing is a gimmick, right? It's a political symbol. It's an incredibly expensive gimmick. Everyone knows it's a gimmick. No one's really pretending. David Cameron and James Cleverly have basically said the same thing already before they were in their current posts. So what are we doing with this gimmick as a country? I don't even mean just the Tory party. As a country, what are we doing? We are being put into a situation where we're trying to pretend that we're this cruel, nasty country that won't treat desperate people, because asylum seekers, whether you think they've got a case or not, are desperate people. Sure, the hostile environment.
Not all of them.
I think we are an honourable country who would want to treat desperate people in a respectful manner, and putting them into a deeply, deeply dangerous situation after they come over here on small boats and put themselves in so much danger is not a British thing to do.
The point is that we don't know how many of those people genuinely are desperate and genuinely are trying to flee their countries because they believe that their lives are at stake.
If you've come over in small boat, you're desperate. You've put yourself in an incredible danger.
That hasn't necessarily been true historically, right? I mean, the last few years we saw thousands of people come from a safe country like Albania. They travel through from France to the United Kingdom. And I'm sorry, but if you do that, it's not necessarily because you believe that your life is in danger in France, but it's because in England we speak English, and many of those people might have families over here. So there are many reasons why they would do so. I think the primary scandal here is that the Home Office asylum seeker backlog has gone up from about 100,000 to upwards of 170,000. So we don't know who these people are. They are still being processed and left in limbo.
Well, I think also the government actually doesn't know how many people are around. They say they've cleared the legacy backlog. There are 52,000 people who are not allowed to work in this country. Now, even if you think the Rwanda scheme is a good scheme, it will take 3 years to send them all to Rwanda. And clearly there isn't the capacity in that. How will this play, though, going into the general election? Because I think if people see that immigration is falling and many people are saying, well, actually, the last in are the first out, could that work for Sunak?
Well, the headline figure isn't falling, and I suppose that's the point. I think I agree. I think it is very gimmicky, the Rwanda policy, and ultimately Sunak wants a photograph of asylum seekers on a plane, even if it is just one. That will then be used as a political football, and asylum seekers have been used as a political football. And it seems as though both main parties are agreeing that illegal migration is a problem. It's just about what the solution is.
What about the row with Emmanuel Macron? That's emerged this week over the Rwanda policy, and Macron describing it as a betrayal of our values.
I think it's a betrayal of British values, right? Because ultimately...
But he didn't name the UK, did he, in this?
Oh, I mean,
I think everyone took it for granted.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, look, Macron's got his own games to play, right? He's very upset about the fact that UK defence and security cooperation with France is kind of weakening as we focus on the AUKUS pact, things like that. Also, let's be honest about it, he's not expecting Rishi Sunak to be Prime Minister in 6 months or a bit longer. He can say what he likes. He's not worried about upsetting Rishi Sunak. The long-term thing that actually Tory leadership would agree on, if they were being honest, is that the only solution to large numbers of asylum seekers, because of extreme weather, because of global conflict, is going to be cooperation between countries like the UK and France. If we're just constantly saying to France, no, you deal with it, then they'll just let people come over in small boats.
To be fair to the government will say we've paid a lot of money to France. We pay hundreds of millions of pounds to France. We do have an agreement with France. That agreement doesn't seem to be being honoured, really.
Well, this is exactly the point, right? The agreement isn't being honoured, and actually Macron using this kind of language, I think, more so plays to his domestic audience rather than internationally. He is effectively showing his own people that live in his country that are going to be voting for him at his next election that actually they're going to be, he's going to be tough with the UK, and he's going to be tough with where that money is actually coming from, but also where those people are going. And actually, if there are those asylum seekers that are crossing the channel still over the next few years, it's not Macron's fault, and he's sort of using that politically. I think he's playing to a domestic audience rather than an international audience.
I don't disagree with that, but it's important to remember that France is still taking a far larger number of asylum seekers in the UK. The number that they let go across the channel, and they are letting them, absolutely, is still far smaller than the number that they're taking. We've got 1% of the world's asylum seekers in the UK, and whilst legally we could say, oh, France should be dealing with the ones who are coming across the channel, in practical terms, we can't force them to do so. We've got to cooperate. We don't really have a choice. Everything else is a gimmick.
I think that's probably true. It's not necessarily about us sort of saying that with hands up, we're not going to be involved at all, because in the reality is that those people are going to be crossing the channel. And the reality is asylum seekers will continue to try and enter the UK because it's a great country.
Reem, Richard, thank you both very much indeed. Still